Before we talk about the Republican strategy moving forward, are you surprised at how seemingly quiet the former president has been in these nearly 2 weeks since the debate? And how much does that play into the current GOP strategy?
It's been really good to see that Donald Trump is staying so disciplined right now. There's an old adage in politics, right? If your opponent is digging their grave, don't take their shovel away from them. And so Donald Trump, if he had been stepping forward and fanning the flames about whether or not Joe Biden should be the nominee, if he was more public, as opposed to the very restrained contrast we've seen, the story would be about him when in fact it should be about Joe Biden, about the questions about his mental acuity and about how Democrats are truly in disarray. I'm not surprised. I know the former president has a very strong team around him, but this is a really nice insight into how they're campaigning now, and really the differences you've seen structurally between the 16 and the 20 campaigns for the Trump team.
You know, it is so interesting, Erin, because we've seen, there's been so much talk about all of the division within the Republican Party between, the far-right Republicans, maybe the more moderates. And now, yes, all talk is on the other side of the aisle. But there's also a lot of talk about this, the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025. We know that the former president is distancing himself from it. But, Erin, it was drafted in part by former Trump advisors. So can he fully really separate himself from it at this point?
Absolutely, he can. He didn't have anything to do with the writing of it. He hasn't been part of the production process of this item. But this is Democrats, what they're hoping is a silver bullet at this point to try and help their candidate win this. They're going to be using Project 2025 as a boogeyman because they can't talk about anything else. They can't really talk about Joe Biden. They can't really talk about policy success because the American people are saying in polling, and Democrats recently in polling, are talking about the fact that they don't believe that Joe Biden has the mental acuity to be president. The American people are saying the economy's not good in polling, that the immigration crisis is real. And so for Democrats to believe that this Project 2025 is their silver bullet to try and get their candidate back on track, it's a fallacy. And so if Donald Trump doesn't want to hug it in, he doesn't have to.
And do you think he will announce his VP pick before the start of the RNC Monday? I mean, we did see Senator Marco Rubio at his rally last night. Was that a not so veiled hint, potentially?
I think Donald Trump's going to be floating and flirting plenty of people out there about who his VP nominee will be. Currently, by RNC rules, it would have to be done by Monday when they begin the convention for him to name his vice presidential candidate. However, RNC rules are very easy to change. And so at this point, he could change it and decide, hey, Wednesday night. It's going to be completely up to Donald Trump ultimately when he announces and who he announces his VP will be. But in these coming days, it is going to be very juicy fodder for reporters and for the American people about what this ticket is going to look like.
Absolutely. And I want to go back to something we had talked about in the first question, just talking about Trump being more disciplined, being quieter now. Erin, how long do you think that lasts? I mean, at what point does it end? Does it end Monday when the RNC begins?
Man, trying to predict Donald Trump is a dangerous game I do not play. But I will tell you this, that when it comes to whether or not he's going to be more boisterous about this, I don't see his strategy changing as of this point. There was a lot of reporting yesterday saying, House Democrats are at the point where they're kind of conceding that Joe Biden's not going anywhere. Then today, George Clooney comes out and the dam is breaking yet again on Joe Biden and Democrats about whether or not he should be the nominee. If Donald Trump had decided to get excited yesterday and really lean in because the reporting was starting to change, he could have, but he didn't. So I see him staying in this position for now, and he'll continue to campaign. I think last night's speech rally was a good indication of how hard he may or may not go at Joe Biden going forward.
And Erin, my last question for you. There is so much focus right now on age, particularly Biden's age. He's 81, but Trump, of course, is right behind him. He's 78. Do you think this election cycle is going to bring about some real attempts to potentially put age limits on public office?
I think that could be a very real possibility. A lot of independent voter friends I have said, If there is an age limit to be able to run for office, there should be an age limit to be in office.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.